John, you and your family have been central figures in the development of the retail real estate industry. What makes a successful shopping center, and how is a great center today different from what one would have been a great center in the past?
I believe that any developer, when they start a project, everybody, of course, wants it to be a successful center. And in the case of regional malls, a great many were successful. And I think it primarily was a result of good design. There was demand for the project. We weren't overbuilt when a great many of these malls were being created. But it was, I would say, conservative design. There was an efficiency in building, keeping control of the costs, and the ability to lease the project. Now, one would say, well, isn't that what everybody should set out to do when doing a development? And my answer to that would be yes. But I think over the years, projects have become, more extravagant, and, people, to separate themselves, have taken, additional risk, oftentimes warranted. But in terms of, better materials and more costs going in, and which, as I say, it raises the risk level. But whereas most of these projects, throughout the 60s, 70s, and even 80s could be successful, at the same time with the increasing competition and people having many more options now to where they can shop, if the owner didn't continue to reinvest into the property, today, that property is no longer going to meet the standards that people expect or the kinds of places that they want to go. And so the big difference, a great many of the very successful centers today, they were built conservatively when they were originally constructed, but because of all of the evolution of the property, and the reinvestment that has been done, the remerchandising, and the owner has been willing to put the capital in, keep it filled with the type of retail that the consumer demands. And, again, while much more challenging today than it was 30 years ago, every bit is rewarding if you do it right, but it does require much more reinvestment. I can't overemphasize the importance of that versus, what was initially required by the early developers.
What makes a great retail tenant these days, and how has that changed over time?
I've always felt that the great retailer, it starts with one person, and that's the merchant. And the merchant was typically the founder of the retail chain. Or if it was a chain that, had over the years changed in terms of its management, just because, it had been many decades, but that there was always a great merchant at the helm. And then you'll see retailers that, they decided the company would be run by the financial person, and the merchant would still be there, but the company was headed up by a financial-oriented person. And almost always I have found that was a recipe that did not bring success. And one could ask, well, if the merchant was still there, what does it matter if the CEO is got a financial background or a merchant's background? Just like if the merchant is the CEO, they have a successful, chief financial officer, why shouldn't it all work the same? And while I don't know exactly the reason for that, I think history and the evidence just shows you that, a retailer should be headed by a great merchant, certainly supported by a very strong financial team, because oftentimes creativity and financial success don't always work together, and it needs to be balanced well. But I do think the simple answer to the question is, you'll always find a great merchant when you see a great retailer.
So from the retail property owner's perspective, when you're thinking about a good tenant for your center, what makes a good tenant for the center beyond them just being a good merchant?
Yeah, I think you have to look at your market, understand the demographics, the people who live in your trade area, and don't try to bring in certain uses that, either might be, too luxury oriented for a particular demographic or vice versa. But more importantly, I think, for me, I am much more what I would call entertainment oriented in my merchandise mix in projects today. I've always been a big believer in movie theaters, restaurants, places that, go beyond just soft goods. And I love the soft good apparel market. It's always been a tough business. It's probably even harder today just because of all of the outside challenges that are placed upon it and alternatives that people have. And while you have alternatives to going to the movies. I mean, we all can watch movies at home. I think we all do, but there's also something to be said about watching a blockbuster, if you will, on the big screen, being part of a larger audience. Eating is always been, something that people enjoy. But those sorts of activities that, honestly can't necessarily be replicated online, to me, I think I feel safer with them, but by no means is that a guarantee that a restaurant is going to meet with success, for instance. And in fact, it's probably riskier with putting restaurants into a project because if they open slow, that usually means, they'll close quickly. Whereas a retailer can miss a season and they have a chance to get it back. If they're a chain, I mean, they can usually absorb, a bad period. And, so there's certainly, arguments that can be made both ways. But, I do think the retailers who are creating a sense of excitement, both in the design of their location, the vibrancy once you're, within the door, be it a restaurant, and, the excitement that they're creating with what they're serving and other people having fun there. All of that builds upon itself. And so, a combination of these sorts of things, I think, is what's best. Now, if you have an A+ mall, all of the great retailers are going to want to be there, and they're going to do very, very well. So, if I'm a mall owner and I have a really good property, I'm going to attract all the good apparel uses to the center. For my types of projects that are a little bit different, I'm relying more on the hard good entertainment side of things than on the soft goods.
So what do you think a great shopping center will look like in the future, 5, 10, 20 years down the road?
The first thing I think of when, what great centers will incorporate in the future are places or spaces that may not necessarily be stores. Again, going back to the project in Cincinnati, it's a combination of an indoor property and an outdoor property. And in the outdoor portion, it has streets running through it, so it very much has the feel of a downtown. We have 2 very large green spaces, almost parks within the property. And we have a non-denominational chapel, a community center, and a beautiful garden that is outside of the chapel, and it can be used as a reception area or just as a place for people to sit and reflect and meditate. These kinds of spaces, traditionally have not been incorporated, in too many properties, and I think that the customer, they embrace it, they appreciate it, and I think the more green space, if you will, that can be added to these properties, will be popular. Now, it's a hard thing to do when retrofitting existing properties is easier for us to do since we were building from the ground up. But at the same time, it's expensive space. You can't quantify. There's no rent that's coming back from it per se. But yet, I think a very important element. I think we'll continue to see the entertainment side of things grow in the properties. As I said, the A-quality malls, I think, will be the dominant places for your luxury retail, your soft good apparel, that sort of thing. The productivity in those malls is so high. That's where all the leading retailers of the world will want to be located. And I think you'll see fewer and fewer of what today I would describe as C quality and below malls that many of them will no longer be in business that still exist today. And they'll all be properties where there's a real reason for them. And not only, you can look at them and say that there's a reason for them, but the customer is going to feel there's a reason to go there. And it's not just a sort of a utilitarian place that is available to them. Not to say that those won't still exist, but I think the ones that are really successful, people are going to want to go there because it's a place to be and not just to take care of your shirt, shoes, and slacks. So.